start with a huge disclaimer. And that is that I'm giving this lecture as a complete amateur. So I'm not a philosopher, and I'm not an ethicist, and I also don't spend enough time on the ethical consequence and so forth, as we all do. That's the first thing. The second thing is there's a lecture where there are no correct answers and no wrong answers. It's just to make you think more. And there are, when we are doing AI and engineering in more general, then these philosophical questions, they are not that far away. These questions are, can computers be intelligent? Can computers have consciousness? What is consciousness anyway? Have computers, so that's a really big one, free will? Or even, do we have free will? What is free will anyway? So all these questions come around when we do research in AI, in particular, creativity, emotions even. And there you get very quickly also to the ethical questions that are related to this. And we have absolutely no time to go into all of those issues. We're setting up a master course in AI to look into the societal relations of AI, so ethical questions, but also, does AI create new art? What is the relation to art with AI in the first place, and so forth? So the question, can machine think, has in principle two dimensions. The one is that previously it was questioned whether computers can outperform humans in specific tasks. And that was called weak AI. So can machines play games? Can they retrieve information automatically, and so forth? And nowadays, I think the answer is clear. There is many really difficult tasks where computer outperform humans. So the question whether there exists something like weak intelligence is solved. Yeah? There is an interesting element to that, namely that we very often consider AI to be something that solves problems that we haven't solved yet, but as soon as we have solved them, we don't really look at it that way anymore, but we consider it sort of trivial. And we've seen that with checkers, tech computers, automated assistants, and so forth. It was absolutely inconceivable to have something like a question answering system 20 years ago, a general question answering system. Now we have this, so nobody talks about it anymore. So I think the successes are there, but they're all mostly still weak AI. But we have this horizon that we always look at what AI is the next step. There's an interesting thing we have to always consider in these tasks, is that the way we look at intelligence in the first place is not necessarily human intelligence or the way that nature has developed intelligent things. So you would say that if a machine can fly, like a bird, that's quite intelligent, that's quite an autonomous system. But you must be sure that you don't necessarily apply the methods that nature made nature able to do things like flying. So people tried for hundreds of years to fly like birds. And in the end, it turned out that you can fly, but not by imitating nature, but by developing other intelligent methods. And I think that's a matter for things we have to look into quite often, and maybe more. The other question of can computers think is the bigger question of can we have a strong AI as well? Can we have machine intelligence that equals in breadth and depth to that of humans? And there are some fundamental arguments that say, yeah, why shouldn't that be the case? So if you would have a simulation of the human brain, if it was possible to program this so that all the neurons in the brain would be running the simulation, why shouldn't that produce the same intelligence that we have in our brain now? So there is no fundamental argument against. There are people who believe it, there are other people who don't believe it. So this book of Roger Penrose, who's a scientist, he says that it is not the same. So there are some more cognitive processes and so forth that we cannot simulate in a machine. But these are interesting questions for us as AI people, but also for philosophers. The other argument is, why would you claim that we can't build intelligence in something from metal, but well in something made out of flesh and blood? So is there any difference in the medium that we have for building this intelligence? And the final one is the one related to the Turing story that I said, that it has been shown that certain things cannot be calculated, and these are obviously the same problems we have as humans. We also can't overcome those theoretical properties because they are on the problem side, they're not necessarily on the solution side. The question for this strong intelligence, how to define that in the first place, obviously goes back a long time, and you've all heard of the famous Turing test. So you have some definition of intelligence, or a practical operationalization, I would say, of intelligence, being that there is some human judge, and he can or she can have contact with two people, two rooms, and in the one room there is a person, and in the other room there is a computer, and he or she can do everything in terms of questioning in order to realize which of the two is now a human person. And that basically defines intelligence by the only thing we know or we've agreed upon as being intelligent, and that is other humans. So this definition goes back, it's a pragmatic definition that goes back, and if we say that other humans are intelligent, then if we can't distinguish some machine from the human, then this machine must also be intelligent. So there are two problems with that. The first one is that this creates some kind of bias, that we have now a notion of intelligence that is sort of almost restricted by our own poor intelligence, because why not define AI as much more stronger than humans? Are we not trying to rebuild and optimize towards intelligence that is human-like? So basically the airplane that is flipping its wings and not flying. The other one is more sort of fundamental, and that is the counter experiments that Searle's Chinese room. And that's basically if we would be able to write a program that wins in the Turing test, then we could replace it. Basically, we have this is all algorithmic. We know how to write this program. So we could have a person, and this person executes steps by step. It executes the computer programs, the bytecode, and does a translation from Chinese to English, just by applying these rules one by one. And then the question is, this person who sits there, is this really something, is there any intelligence? And Pearl's answer is that it's not. It's just sort of someone who doesn't understand what it's about, so there's no grounding, as it's called, also to reality. He just sits there and does what the computer would do. And there's nowhere is there any real understanding of the language and of the problems that they're spoken about. And there is was a huge discussion in the beginning of AI about these questions of what is now intelligence. And this boils down a little bit to the question of whether computers can know anything about the real world. And this particular something that played a big role in the earlier days of AI, when it was very much symbol grounded, symbol based. So the thought was that basically if we have all the knowledge modeled and we have our logical systems, then we can derive all the facts, all the information that we need for intelligence. And then the question from some people came, can those symbols ever represent anything that is related closely to the real world? So the computer cannot know what red is. It can just have a representation. Yeah?
We also don't really know what red is. And I always claim that I could never see red unless I showed it. So it's more like an
yes, but you have a way of relating the real world to yourself. And this interface, this way of grounding, that you would look around and there's a lot of red, and we would all have the same grounding on these colors. And that's something that I think has now, AI now has far more, because of the deep learning, I think has changed that also enormously. But if you go back to the discussion then 20, 30 years ago, this link between realizing that there are 70 shades of red in here, but they're all red, and we can all ground these notions of red in the reality, that's something that's in AI is relatively recent. Okay. But I have to continue. All of those questions would deserve an hour of discussion with the real expert. So, but you're absolutely right. The question how much we relate with language, for example, to the real world or to some other representation over this real world is something that we have regularly in our research seminars and so forth. There's one other issue related to the philosophical questions of society, is more societal, I would say, and that is if you go back into history, it's simply amazing how much the rate of progress of technical developments has exponentially grown. So if you go back millions of years, we started to manage to put together a piece of wood and a stone and to use it to hammer things. That was something that our species took hundreds of thousands of years to sort of work out. And all these developments sort of get quicker and quicker and quicker, so that in the past 50 years, so many incredible things have changed that really change our life. So I think that's the big point. So obviously things have changed, but these are really game changers. So the web really changed the way how we communicate, how we get information, and how we make business and so forth. And these changes come more and more rapidly. And then the question is, how does it go in the future? And one of the notions that comes here, and that's interesting to think about, is there a turning point, basically, where this progress will end, at least our role as humans in it, where there is a computer suddenly, or yeah, at one point, AI will be so intelligent or so strong that it will be able to produce better new tools, new AI, than we as humans can. And that's more, of course, a little bit of futurism rather than real scientific questions at the moment. But it's an interesting thought. How do we continue with the progress that we are making with all these huge technological developments that are coming faster and faster and faster in the past generations? So an additional question that is very active at the moment, people interested in, is the question of interpretability. So we have now systems that can do a lot in terms of strong AI it's maybe too much, but if you have a system that can, like Watson, really give a general question answering system, that's already quite some achievement in that direction. But the question is, can we also explain it to humans why it does what it does? So we are now, this is really one of the most active research fields, I think, in our domain, is how can we look at these algorithms that Peter explained yesterday of the deep neural networks and the training, and how can you now explain to a doctor why it suggests a certain diagnosis and so forth. And that is a big challenge for AI, sort of to relate AI back to the humans. I only want to mention 3 huge philosophical debates which are related to doing AI, to the AI problems. And this is the mind-body problem, this is the question of consciousness, and the question of free will. And these are all discussions that were started in the, I think, 16th century, not started, but sort of there was the modern way of looking at this, I think, was started in the 16th century with Descartes. The question is, what is the relation between what we would call the mind and the body? And Descartes had the theory that there was some kind of entity, that was disjoint from the body, that made us, that he called the mind, and that there was a dualism between the physical thing and the mental thing that would make us conscious beings. And obviously, these questions are very interesting as such, but they are also very interesting from a computer perspective, computer science perspective, because the question whether a computer an AI can have consciousness, so be aware of what it does and whether we can attribute it to it and so forth, are now getting more and more realistic with the kind of systems that we are building. So there are the two theories where we have an interaction between the sort of external mind thing, or the other idea where we would say that everything that we have in terms of consciousness and free will and so forth comes out of the matter, the physical being, the things that happen, that my body builds like a machine. There are different ways of looking at this, and also this, of course, has impact on the debate and the position that you take in the position, in the question whether a computer can have a consciousness or not. So I have to skip that. There is an interesting theory that consciousness is also something that we as humans very easily assign to some other thing. So my cat is very intelligent because whenever I come down, it comes running. But the question is that really something I make it look like, and it's just sort of a reflex it has because then it knows that it gets food? Or is it really something, awareness, is that a sign of consciousness or not? And very often it's the case that I assign it to my cat. And there is a very nice sort of little experiments movie that people did, and if you look at this experiment, you will automatically assign some kind of consciousness to objects that are nothing else but triangles and circles and lines. It's very, very strong. Please look at it. And that is relevant to the question, can we ever assign some kind of consciousness or emotions to computers? Will these things behave in a way that we assign it emotions, or will there really be emotions? And Daniel Dennett is the philosopher who sort of introduced this idea of the intentional stance, that it's more us assigning emotions to a computer than these really being emotions, whatever that might be. And then in the end, the last and the huge philosophical question is, can computers have free will? So can a computer in the end decide on what to do? And that is very quickly comes to the question, do we have as humans free will in the first place? And if you have this notion of materialism that we'd seen 2 slides before, that everything is a sort of, my brain is a computer and it produces consciousness and produces decisions and so forth, then the question is very strongly, if it is physics in my head, do I have free will, or is it just sort of the law of physics that makes me do something? So there is not enough time for this, but these are very, very important philosophical questions for us when we deal with computers, and maybe not when we have a Schnatzen program, but when we have something that we would call a real AI system, that's now maybe science fiction, but that you, yeah, in some of the movies, this is already, I think, quite nicely projected, and these questions really become very relevant and important then. As I said, I want to not forget the ethical dimension, and slightly more time for the ethical questions. And that split in 3 categories. The one is sort of science fiction ethics, but also problems we face now. And the first thing is, what is ethical behavior or in the first place, how should we behave in relation to AIs, and how does this existence of AI impact our daily lives? It's not that simple to define in the first place what ethical behavior is. So if you think about it more carefully, it's clear that not all unethical behavior is illegal, not all illegal behavior is ethical, and not all legal behavior is ethical. So do we have examples for things that legal behavior is unethical or ethical? So if you think of, from our perspective nowadays, if a slave escaped from capture, then this was highly illegal. But with our current moral systems, we would accept this as an ethically acceptable behavior. The other direction is if we standing alone, nobody around, red light, it's illegal to cross the street, but nobody will claim that it's unethical to do. Yeah. So we need to find a good way of defining what our ethical behavior means in the first place. There are two or several schools in that, and I think the two extremes are the fundamental ethics and the pragmatic ethics. So there are people who have moral rule systems like commandments, which define your ethical behavior as a kind of frame to which you have to behave. And on the other side, you have, and this can be religious, but it can also be societal. And on the other hand, you have the radical freedom, where you say I have free will, I can behave, and there are no external rules that tell me what to do or not. So interesting in that is that so this position of the radical freedom is Sartre, goes back also to, or he's one of the proponents of this. But he makes very strongly the case that not having those external rules doesn't make it easy for me to behave unethically or so, because the responsibility of behaving ethically is with me. So I cannot say, this rule tells me to do this. It's always the individual responsibility. There are some global laws, ethical laws that have been written down for dealing with AI. So the famous Asimov's law is three of them. A robot may not injure a human being, or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey the orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And the third one is a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. This is some kind of way of trying to assign some legal framework, some ethical framework for the AIs and how to behave and so forth. Okay. Now I want to be a bit more practical, and that is also to get you involved and to something that I think is very relevant for the kind of work we do every day. And that is the responsibility and when we build something that other people are using. So who's heard of the trolley problem? Okay. So I still repeat it for the others. So the question is that there is a trolley and it has big out of control, and it goes down with high speed one line or the other line, and you have the decision of either make the train go straight on, killing 5 people, or turning right, kill 1 person. And I would like to ask you to go to this following Kahoot page, if that's I think we still have time for doing that, because there are some questions related to that. So please go to kahoot.it and register with this game pin, and then I will give you some questions. Naughty nicknames beware. One click and you're out. Okay, should we wait longer or is everybody? No? Most people are in? Okay, so let's start the questions. There are 7 questions, but let's start the one. You can save 5 people by redirecting the train so that it kills only 1 person. Yes, that would be the right decision, is red. Blue is no, it's ethically unacceptable. Yellow is I drew a dice. And green is I don't care. Okay, I think we have almost everybody. Okay. So, most people say it's the right decision to take. So who's a blue? Do we have any blue persons speaking out? Yes. Why?
Nature takes its part, so when it looks about naming one person discuss the cure to cancer.
Okay, did you get what he said? So let's let nature do its path and maybe the one person who's killed would cure cancer and 100,000 would survive. Yeah? You have a point?
Yeah, I think you should have that power to decide.
But the whole point of the exercise is that you do have the power.
Yeah, I think you should be allowed to.
So you shouldn't be allowed to make such a decision. But then it just means you stand with your button that you can press, and not making a decision is taking a decision, isn't it? Yeah. So basically you take the decision that I can't decide, so the situation is by random. In this situation that it will go 5, I leave it. So that's similar to the argument there. Let nature do the, yeah, okay?
The red choice is just a pragmatic approach to this problem, just maximizing the most amount of goods for the most amount of people.
So here's pragmatism as an argument. Let's just do some formula saying heuristic is the fewer people die, the better. Yeah? Okay, I couldn't hear that much, but I think we could move to the next question, and then we have maybe a more informed discussion, because that is now the question that some of you know, which is the fat man variation. So suppose now that you don't have a button to press, but now you have to actually push some very fat man on the rails to stop the train, to rescue the 5 others. Yeah? So you're not pressing the button, but you're pushing someone to save the other 5. So you're guessing what's coming now, so I want your opinion on that one. Okay, banana ananas, give it a go again. So, you can push a man on the trail. Is it the right thing to do? It's the wrong thing to do. Throw a dice or don't. Okay. Is there anybody still waiting, or can I move on? I just move on. Oh, what did change? Who switched? Who would sort of not press the button, press the button but not push? Why? let's give one huge disclaimer here. There is no correct answers here. There is no good answers here. There is no better solution than another. It's just something. It's a game that we have to play, because I'm getting to the example which is really relevant for us as AI is in a minute. So we have to deal with that. And there are no good answers, there are no bad answers. But it's interesting, I think, to see that pushing someone or not pressing the button makes a great difference. You have the point first, yeah?
Wouldn't it be also possible in the first case to just for yourself to put on the train and then one person dies instead of all?
Yeah. So there's a point, was a point that it doesn't really make a difference, because in a way it's the same that you kill a person. Yeah, you have it? Well,
I think that's unethical for everyone to just change, so their behavior changing is unethical.
I should have prepared a Kahoot for that, whether everybody thinks it's unethical to change the mind here. I think it's absolutely not unethical to change your mind when you reflect on things. And I think learning from more reflection, I think is a good thing and not a bad thing. That's my personal opinion here. Yeah? So we have another variant of this. And so let me see. So there is an interesting mind experiment that you all know from when you were children, and that's called the wheel of ignorance. And that is basically you have to make the decision, but you're not told which of the persons you are. So that's like when I have my kids. I ask my kids to have a cake, and they have to separate it in two parts for my daughter and my son. And one of them has to do it. I always say, you cut it in half, and your sister is allowed to choose which one to take. That gives you the best chance to sort of get everybody the same amount of cake. Here it's the same. You're the wheel of ignorance. You have to make a decision, but you don't know which part you are in. So now another variant of this is that in order to rescue 5 people, you have to kill someone else to get, they all are ill. So they two have a kidney, one have a liver, one has a sort of heart failure, and you just have to kill someone, you take out of all the organs, and you rescue 5 people with the organs of this person. So banana ananas is still, oh, I didn't have a question for that. So I have 90 seconds for this other question, which is now the question that is relevant for us. Namely, we are writing a program for an intelligent car, and the car has to decide when it sees I can crash into these people, or I crash into a wall and kill my driver. Yeah? So, do you think your system that you've built, the algorithm that you've programmed, the logic that you've given it, should kill the driver, or should crash into the people, or it should throw a dice, or you don't care? So you still have 50 seconds, and you've already answered before I explained. That's also good. That means the question was obvious. Yeah? So now this is very close to what we do. So be aware of this. This is really decisions that you have to take when you program an AI algorithm. Okay. I'm really, really curious to see what comes out. Okay. Now we have a big majority for the car to decide to kill its driver to rescue the people on the road. That is actually the next question to come. Yes? That is the next question. What happened to banana ananas? Which car would you buy? A car that kills the driver, or a car that crashes into the people? I shouldn't know which car I buy, I don't care. Bicycle is not an option. So there's still 3 or 4 people who can't make up their mind. Please make up your mind, otherwise I'll skip. Yes, thanks, excellent. So what do you think comes out of this? Anybody buys the car that kills the driver? Yes. The ethically aware, sort of the good people choose the car. So, of course, I mean, this is a kind of fun experiment. I think it's very, very unfair because it confronts us with dilemmas to which there is no good answer. But to all of you who do something with algorithms and with computers and with control and with AI, these are decisions that are so close to what you're doing you can't think of. So that could be in the effect of applying a machine learning algorithm that is trained on some data. In a way, we are building systems that make decisions over life and death. Might sound a bit dramatic, but that's not so far away from your daily lives in the future. Yeah? So I have very, very little time to touch upon some other issues on ethics, and I can only mention them very briefly, sort of list them. I think this is a very important one because we have to think of our own responsibility in what we are doing, and also the fact that there is no straight answers to it. And not pressing a button, not doing anything, is often not an option. There are many other ethical questions. So how do we deal with AI? So there's this series on AI where people sort of on purpose are allowed to mistreat AIs. So the question of morality, does it only apply to other humans or animals? That's one of the next slides. Does it also apply to machines and AIs? And I skipped this. Another one that's closer to the dilemma we just had with the trolley is the one on the tools that you build, can they be misused? And the most famous example is the Manhattan Project, where particular physicists really developed incredibly useful theory and tools and so forth, and realized often very late that they actually participated in building the nuclear bomb that killed hundreds of thousands of people in Japan. And so we often have discussions, our technology that I'm doing research on can be part of some military projects. Is that something that I should endorse? Is that something that I should not do? Can I do research without being involved in military research? And there are no good answers. It's the same thing. There are huge dilemmas. It's very important that you think about them yourself and that you make conscious decisions. And they might be wrong, the conscious decisions, but make sure that you have thought about these things before you end up like the people in the Manhattan Project realizing, oh, my technology actually was very good at killing 100,000 people. Question is very related to animal rights. So there has been, I think there is agreement for many of us that killing animals for food is good, or is acceptable. It's not good, but it's acceptable. But there has been a big discussion about a killing of a cow in a scene for a movie. And the question is that something we kill for some purposes, we kill for others? And how do we treat our AIs? Are we allowed in the future to switch off our AIs? So these are the big ethical questions. You know that there are many of those. I think the 3 big ones is autonomous weapon systems. There has been a huge discussion in the last year on how do these autonomous systems, how will they be controlled? And the legal solution to that was from the Dutch government that there needs to be some human in the loop in a decision whether an autonomous weapon should kill someone. But this notion of human in the loop was so widely broad that even if someone programs the algorithm, that would be the human in the loop. So there are big discussions really on the daily basis, what in which law should be put in what form, and what our influence is on making these decisions when you build autonomous systems, intelligent agents I could also call them, is a very important question. And also that we go to the government and tell them, you're completely stupid if you say there is a human in the loop because we use the machine learning algorithm to make some decisions. That is not a human in the loop. And these kind of discussions we have with the Dutch government and so forth. I haven't even touched on privacy. You all will all be aware that the likes of Facebook and Google, they know zillions of times more about you than the KGB and the Stasi and the Romanian Secret Service and the German Secret Service. Yeah? So the amount of privacy that we have given up is enormous. So is that okay to do? Is it because we choose to publish this ourselves? Is that okay? And you see, I wanted to have a Kahoot on this question because I really think it's interesting. And that is not only a question for the people who are stupid enough to give their data or their photos on Facebook, but also for us as developers for those systems and researchers who try to find information out of it. Then, particularly for machine learning, you have the problem that very often there is a bias in the decisions in daily life. For example, racial profiling is something that we have in our people's head, and that's very easily translated into behavior of systems. So that systems decide to say, okay, if someone is black, then the probability calculated on available data is higher that they use drugs is higher than they don't use drugs or whatever, and that based on this simplified assumptions, decisions are taken. So we have to be very careful that we have in our data usually high biases, and these have huge, huge ethical implications. So we are involved in initiatives such as responsible data science, which is about fairness of the collection of the data collection and towards the users. It's accuracy so that you don't make predictions on wrong data, confidentiality, only the data that we really want to share and is shared, and transparency that I know exactly what data and what information is used. So this was the sort of rush through ethical question, and I hope that you have a little bit in the idea that this is a far bigger topic than we make it look like. This is the end of this lecture series, so I really thank you for coming. Good luck with the final project. I will see you next week, probably for projects, and good luck with the rest of the study.